flow more freely to the Cuban people. All of our work in Cuba, including this project, was reviewed in detail in 2013 by the Government Accountability Office and found to be consistent with US law and appropriate under oversight controls. It is also no secret that in hostile environments, governments take steps to protect the partners we are working with on the ground. The purpose of the Zunzinho project was to create a platform for Cubans to speak freely among themselves, period. At the initial stages, the grantees sent tech news, sports scores, weather, and trivia to build interest and engage Cubans. After that, Cubans were able to talk among themselves, and we are proud of that. USAID is a development agency, and we work all over the world to help people exercise their universal rights and freedoms.
Well, I've been talking to the Democratic Congresswoman Karen Bass. She sits on the House Foreign Relations Committee, and I asked her first what she made of these reports.
Well, I was very surprised about the allegation, and I look forward to learning more about this program. And if it is what is being reported, I was very disappointed that our tax dollars were being used like this.
And what in particular worries you? Is it that this is an agency, USAID, that is meant to be distributing foreign aid, but apparently is engaged in covert operations?
Well, you know, USAID does deliver foreign aid and is also very much involved in promoting democracy around the world. However, to me, if you're going to promote democracy, you should do it in a transparent fashion, not in a covert fashion. If what I am reading is what happened, I think it actually undermines efforts at promoting democracy.
Yes, well, the White House, as you probably know, has said that there was nothing covert about it, that this was, as you say, just a development program, and yet nobody, and I guess your committee included, seems to have known anything about it.
Well, I have traveled in many countries now visiting USAID projects, and when it's a development project, people know it's happening, and apparently from news reports, reinforces a stereotype of the United States trying to go in and manipulate the governments in other countries. And I don't think that that is helpful. I think ultimately that undermines what our goals should be.
What about the overall purpose of this social network that was set up? I mean, do you back that idea, though, that Cubans should have more access to information and should be able to communicate with each other? I mean, in principle, is that okay?
I definitely think that Cubans should have more access and be able to communicate with each other, but that should be determined by Cubans.
Yes, but they don't have that, do they? That's the point, I suppose.
Well, but I think that that's something that has to be determined. I don't think that you can enforce your will on other countries. And so, you know, things are changing in Cuba. Just recently, there were changes made to the economy where private investors could go and participate in partnerships with Cuban individuals or the Cuban government, and that change came about because the Cuban people wanted it to come about. And so I think when you look at democratic processes around the world, the ones that are the most successful are the ones that are indigenous to that country, not ones that are imposed from outside.
And I wonder whether these revelations could undermine that, because of course for the Cuban government this confirms their worst fears, doesn't it? That America's trying to do whatever it can to undermine the system there.
I think it just feeds into that, and I think that's very unfortunate.
Democratic Congresswoman Karen Bass. Well, Professor Brian Atwood ran USAID from 1993 to 1999. He's now at the University of Minnesota. I asked him if he was shocked by today's revelations.
I'm quite surprised and very troubled by it. We made every effort when I was the administrator, and I think with many other administrators as well, to be as transparent as possible. This secret program, whether or not it was covert, really undermines trust in USAID and plays into the hands of people who would prefer to see USAID as simply an instrument of very narrow, short-term U.S. government interests. Development cooperation takes time and it takes trust, and USAID has always operated in a very different way. This is very unlike what USAID has done in the past.
And how do you explain that change then?
I don't know. I think there's a good deal of pressure. When I was an administrator, Congress actually passed a piece of legislation that asked us to do a study of what a transition in Cuba would be like. And I thought that was perfectly legitimate to do an open and a study of what a transitional situation would look like so that the government could better prepare for a transition. There hasn't been a transition, sadly. I do think that it is important for perhaps other government agencies or certainly non-governmental organizations to use social media to get to the Cuban people. I don't have any objections to that.
But not USAID. You don't think it should be its remit?
Absolutely, it should not be part of what USAID's mission is, and unfortunately in this case it was.
Yes, because as you mentioned, I mean, in the future, partners abroad are always going to wonder whether the USAID people they're talking to have an ulterior motive, aren't they?
Exactly. I mean, the motive of USAID's mission is development cooperation. The success of USAID with American taxpayers' money relates to the success of our partners. If they're able to achieve development results, it is to USAID's benefit. That's what it does. And if it doesn't have the trust, it can't really achieve those results.
In just a sentence or two, we're nearly out of time. I mean, should heads roll over this? Should someone be taking the blame for this?
I'm not going to get into that. I'm very sad that the Office of Transitions was involved in this because I set up that office to be involved in transitions. This is not a transition, and I think it compromises that office's ability to do its work as well as USAID.
And that was Brian Atwood, who ran USAID in the 1990s. You're listening to NewsHour from the BBC World Service. And still to come on the programme, why the Turkish political establishment fears the chairman of a leading Turkish football team, Aziz Yildirim.
We are talking about a man, Aziz Yildirim, who is in some respects more powerful than the chief of Turkish military, because it was easier to put military chief in prison than to put Aziz Yildirim in prison, because hundreds of thousands of Fenerbahce supporters took to the street several times to protest Aziz Yildirim's jailing.
We'll be hearing from Turkey in just a few seconds' time. Now, main headlines this hour: Russia's detained 25 Ukrainians, accusing them of planning terror attacks around the time of the Crimean referendum. And the White House has confirmed that a Twitter-like social network was set up in Cuba by a US government aid agency, but has denied allegations that it was a covert operation. You're listening to the BBC. This is NewsHour with James Menendez in London and Tim Franks in Turkey.
Welcome to Istanbul. It's late evening here, but around me in the centre of the city, the streets are still swirling to the brisk cross currents of the locals, marching to and from cafes, taxis, the metro. Beyond them, there are the skyscrapers, most of them dimmed after their day's work, trying to make Turkey's fast-expanding economy not run out of puff. In contrast, from my vantage point here in European Istanbul, just over to the east, across the Bosphorus, Asian Istanbul is strung with light. This is the city which famously spans two continents, but it belongs to a country riven with division. One of those polarities is between the all-conquering electoral machine, the AK Party, in power for 12 years and counting, and their erstwhile allies, the followers of the Islamic cleric Fethullah Gulen. Listen to the words of Professor Yasin Aktay, Deputy Chairman of the AK Party, defending, to me, Turkey's record on imprisoning journalists.
Unfortunately, there is a machine of propaganda working against Turkey, and this machine, unfortunately, is led by the Gulen movement and by the Gulen media or by their allies. In Turkey, legal system is completely autonomous and independent of the government, and this is led much more by the Gulen movement.